Welcome to part 2 of this 5-part presentation on consultant learning, a framework for empowering students to excel and a framework for transforming your teaching experience. I'm Scott Kunkel, professor at the University of San Diego and the creator of consultant learning. In part 1 of this presentation, we learned that consultant learning turns the classroom into a role-play game that's fun because students know the rules, students get timely feedback, and students have a stake in the game. We learned that in consultant learning, the rules of the game manage the classroom, freeing the teacher up to coach and to mentor. And we learned that consultant learning turns schoolwork into meaningful work. In part 2, we'll learn how project-based learning, PBL, is different from traditional teaching, and see that consultant learning is a variant of student-centered PBL. Consultant learning uses project-based learning, PBL. Project-based learning, also called problem-based learning, or PBL, just may be the greatest innovation in teaching since the printing press. PBL allows schoolwork to become meaningful work. To understand PBL, let's compare a traditional class with a PBL class. In a traditional class, the teacher presents material, and then the teacher tests to see if the student learned it, which usually means memorized it. The traditional class is primarily a very passive learning mode. The traditional class is not meaningful work, as we discussed in part 1. This kind of teaching uses the empty vessel philosophy, that the student's brain is an empty vessel waiting for the teacher to pour knowledge and wisdom into it. Now let's take a look at a PBL class. In a PBL class, by contrast, the learning objectives for the course are built into a project or a series of projects. The students set out to complete the projects. The students must complete the learning objectives of the course in order to complete the projects. Properly constructed projects not only fulfill the learning objectives of the course, they're also meaningful work. The students set out to complete the projects, and then they realize that they don't have the knowledge necessary to do it. So they turn to the teacher and ask, how do I do this? Where do I find this information? And the teacher provides just-in-time learning, leading and assisting the students in their quest to complete the projects, instead of trying to force knowledge down their throats. Now, the students think that the task is to complete the projects, so learning happens painlessly, almost without effort. This is a very active learning mode. The philosophy of this learning style is that we learn more by doing than we do by just hearing or seeing. There's an old Chinese proverb that says, "Tell me and I'll forget. Show me and I may remember. But involve me and I'll understand." There are two types of PBL. The first type is what is called project-centered PBL, where the project itself is the center of the process. You've probably seen TV news shows about a grade school class where the entire class is working on a project about the moon. And one group is looking at craters on the moon, and another group is researching the influence of moon on tides and so forth. This is an example of project-centered PBL. The second type is what's called student-centered PBL, where each student is allowed to custom design projects to match their own interests and goals. With student-centered PBL, each student has a unique, personalized educational experience from the course because their portfolio of projects will be different from every other student's portfolio of projects in the class. Consultant learning uses student-centered PBL. One of the negatives to most teacher training in PBL is that there's little guidance provided on how the teacher actually implements projects in the classroom. For example, how does the teacher evaluate projects? If a poor quality project is submitted, does the teacher accept it or require the students to redo it? If the students redo the project and resubmit it, how does the teacher grade the project? Do they record the student's grade on their first submission, on the second submission, an average of the two? In addition, how does the teacher even motivate the students to want to do the projects? Consultant learning provides the implementation process missing in PBL training. As we said, consultant learning is a student-centered PBL course. The students are playing a role-play game, acting as consultants. They design and customize consulting projects that require them to complete the learning objectives of the course. However, in consultant learning, all projects must be completed with excellent quality. A poor quality project is returned to the student with notes from the teacher as to what it needs in order to be an excellent quality project. The student must redo and resubmit the project with excellent quality before the teacher pays the agreed-upon fee for the project. In consultant learning, the teacher controls the content of the learning while the student controls the context. Let me give you an example. A 12th grade English teacher told me that he's required by state standards to assign students to do a literary analysis. Before he began using consultant learning, he'd have all the students do a literary analysis on the same book, such as Moby Dick. Then he would have the joy of grading 100 literary analyses on Moby Dick. Now he goes over how to do a literary analysis in class and then requires all the students to complete a literary analysis project on any work they choose. The teacher is controlling the content, how to do a literary analysis, and the students are allowed to control the context, what work they're going to do their literary analysis on. He even allows them to do a literary analysis on a comic book or a piece of the student's own writing. Consultant learning provides the rules of the game and the materials for the course that provide a strong structure so that students feel safe to experiment and try new things. The consultant learning structure provides maximum flexibility for student choice, increasing student motivation. In Part 2, we compared traditional learning with PBL. We learned that consultant learning is a variant of student-centered problem-based learning. And we learned that in consultant learning, the teacher controls the content while the student controls the context. This increases student motivation and increases knowledge retention. In Part 3 of this presentation, we'll learn about grading in a consultant learning course and how grading may affect student interest and dropout rates. Select Part 3 to learn about grading in a consultant learning course.